just think this is going to be fun. Ooh, recording in progress. Okay. So what I want to say before I start, one, I am in fact in Los Angeles for the weekend, and I am in my brother's house in a space I don't quite know, in a Zoom setup I don't quite know. So if anything goes haywire, let me know. I will fix it. And it is a very healthy 4 o'clock here for the strange reasons of our time zones. As Jared alluded to, Madness is a book I just put out that is pretending to be a selected poems for a fictional poet. So it gives the life of a fictional poet, his books, which are all made up by me. And his name is Luis Montes Torres. And the way the book is divided is basically, it has these little editorial introductions and then the book, or a selection from each of his books. And then we do it again. So another editorial introduction, selection from his books. What I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to read 5 poems from spread out in the book. And then I'm going to bring us to settle into one section, and I'm going to read its editorial introduction and its selected poem. And that will run us a cool 12 minutes or so. And then we'll all listen to it together. So let me start us off with some things from around the book. This poem is called Design. Let's presume there is a formula to foliage, and someone with their head on straight could dedicate life to natural patterns. It might be unbelievable, giving yourself room to criticize and hold hands. I will drive a kite into a leafy branch, a bookmark for lack of a better word. Because I'm jumping around this book, it might take me a second to find things. All right, this is called Spending, and it's from a section of the book that is of love poems. It must be like batteries, spending this afternoon in a picture with you, both of us wondering when every minute is and how to find our way back to them. Sure, we can take the river there. We can open our mouths in front of the window for the passersby. This spending is the riddle of all. What we make in every method of passing one after the other the days, or how we decorate them as we move. Maybe I'm making the total nature of waiting into a parade, but you'll have to excuse me. This is what I bury, and how I know that something disappeared is luxurious and able. 2 hips joined together is safe. I let my attention be liquid when my head is resting on your chest hair. The only time that being physically real, being findable by logic, doesn't scare me. So we'll sew an hour into another. Admit no one we know really is dying, just to make the afternoon yawn, fizzle, spread, or spring. This poem is called Endeavors. I get a dreadful worry about blue lights, money, the mail, and this feeling sits in me a long time like pear slices in their juice, as my friend tells me a story of all his recent endeavors, which somehow gets to rumors of the Wendigo, but it doesn't get worse. In fact, I get to picturing time spent with my friend, picturing the time we're spending now, and I tell him to start the story over because I wasn't really listening. This poem is called Today. I thought I would do a day themed read, because we're kind of doing a day thing here. Today. Tomorrow's fog is perpendicular to my idea of ordered surprise. It's everything we refuse to say out loud. Today, I said grace over my meal, wondering about the cold front coming in. If I'm being honest, this entire conversation brings up my most belabored memories. Missing the point, joking that I celebrate certainty, wanting more, kissing you on the forehead, worrying about the dog. A diorama of our home answers the easiest questions, and I put little faith in this poem's ability to solve the others. I see you're counting in your head. It's a drip of oil. It's what I already know. Okay, last random part of the book poem. and we'll settle somewhere. This poem is called Flush, and I chose it for a reason that will become obvious to Wayne in about a second. How long does it take for the idea that the water is getting darker, thinner, to pass between 12 people touching shoulder to shoulder? Alongside flushed car parts, an opera singer disappears as steam over the sea. Okay, so I'm going to read the entirety of a section called Hold Me to It. It's going to start with a little biographical kind of note about where we're at in the narrative from our editors about Luis. And it starts with a mention of his longtime partner, Evan. So that's who we're talking about, his booth. While the couple's move to Philadelphia was occasioned by Evan Bauer accepting a role in an artificial intelligence laboratory in Fishtown, Montes Torres happily took the opportunity to leave his work at the library in Los Angeles. Though in his moments of fragility, the predictability of his work had been comforting, in recent years that stability had corrupted into stagnation and frustration. For the first 3 years of their life in Philadelphia, Montes Torres worked as a dog walker, notably for an exclusive breeder of golden retrievers, Laura Pinshickle Thompson, wife of the industrial developer Jensen Thompson. 6 months after moving to Philadelphia, motivated by the relative uneventfulness of the publication of Dictation, Montes Torres began work on a new manuscript, which would become Hold Me to It. Continuing his interest in weather, Montes Torres had become fascinated by the flooding and collapse of the New York City subway system in early 2027, extensively documenting his thoughts on preventative measures for other cities on his blog. Hold Me to It is clearly influenced by this and other climate disasters of the 2020s in its fixation on the failures of infrastructure to cohere with the natural. Imagined as a kind of coda to the Jeremiah that made up the previous book, Hold Me to It holds closely to themes of dictation and is again written in the form of the long poem. Less explicitly maximalist, however, the slim book only reaches 65 pages, published without front or back matter, excluding even a formal copyright page for its publisher Half-Life Books. The 4 editors of Half-Life Books began the press in 2026. They lived and worked together in Philadelphia in a polyamorous relationship consisting of ceramics professor Rebecca Reese, restaurateur Fratelli de Bruno, waste management activist Carmen Inacabo, and human interest journalist Joshua Leaf, a friend to Montes Torres from Leaf's years in Los Angeles. Half-Life was dedicated to the publication of experimental poetic works and the mounting of catered art exhibitions in South Philadelphia. Leaf solicited Montes Torres for a manuscript in 2027, and Half-Life published Hold Me to It in March of 2028 in an edition of 300. If any of you doubted I was in Los Angeles, here's a In-N-Out root beer that I'm using as my between poems drink. Okay, this is from Hold Me to It. Infrastructure has little capacity for promise making, as we have all now learned. Though steadiness is its first and only appeal. The idea is freckling on second consideration, a bad reflection, as it always really was, of the logical results of what we set out to do. Do not fantasize about Atlantis, buried treasure, when you were so baldly lied to about what you could set your mind to and disperse. A better version of the lily pad is encoded in the current version of the lily pad. Return of the ice, fingers shaped into a gun, the autumn of a philosopher stuck. Be sure to watch the species in the other screen where colors are brighter and harder to track. I go where I go, you rob me of my balance. In a feature of August, the temptation is to fear the heat that leads a melody, but in no way is this behavior truly sane. You cannot sleep with your head against a thesaurus when the promise made was against variation in the name of something dressed as innovation, which we now see as dishonest. Faulty patterning. In laying out where an object began and another object ended, the promise reduced each object to its lifespan. It circulated the bad news. It said to be eager with your mind and its silhouette. It saw pleasure as exhaustion's ricochet. It planted plants. You hear that like I do, mosquitoes passing by your ear. You hear that like I do, a third color made in reference to 2 others set up just behind the stage. Everything about the golf course. The end of all these minor acts within the diamond, if that is how you would like to think of it. But these are the returns, the return to death, the conversation of all animals in this new form of intimacy with our thoughts. Of course, water returns and reshelves. I'm handing out microscopic fires, something you could silence with the pinch of 2 fingers. An island taken from its context, skin peeled from a snake, is a thin thing pulled apart by storms. Nothing could keep that word. Sun, if it careens, permit me to desire. Who is watching you as you run through the woods, dirt scraping your thighs as they rush and sweat, the taste of cocoa remaining just between your molars? You invent a half lion, half girl to rid you of this flu, which is, in every case, a futile effort, a dream from the head of St. Eustace. The promise absolved you of your genuine paranoia, pretended that it was a system of roads. You finally let the firefly out of your hand. You watch as a friend makes a deep burn in his arm, a promise that I still love you. A world where the lily pad does not exist is programmed into the current version of the lily pad. There is so much discussion around the behavior of the lie. This time, there is no thought of each other, or there is only thought of each other, our holding here a honeybee as a forest burns for the frightening moments when we think the same thing. The promise is that all your senses are harvesters. The milder anxieties will do you little good now, though they are unrelenting in their small, constant need, as we are chest deep in purchased horror. I think singing to myself will guarantee me a next thought, though it barely does. You speak as if to fill this room with sound. You barely fit into your clothes. 2 mulch pieces rubbed together will not start a fire. A lithograph of a clover. Here and then I borrow your loneliness as we watch the earth bite its lip and die. This is what it can make of itself. It bears its limit to you. In sweetness pulled from a thorn, the difference between belong and belong in its least optimistic capacity. Every steady and silver hand holding, an incomplete remark made on a bad bet. Except in loving you, I stupidly hope, or except in taking a ruler to the ground. When the stove is lit, when I promise you anything, hold me to it. That's all from me. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks so much, Gabriel. I really loved how the way you use language, not as a proxy, but as an appendage, an extension and expansion of the mental and emotional depths to which your poems consent. So thank you so much for sharing. Next is Wayne Koestenbaum, a poet, critic, fiction writer, artist, filmmaker, performer, and might I also add, an amazing pianist of crescendoing keys, edge melodies. He has published 22 books, including Ultramarine, which is right here, the 3rd volume of his trance trilogy, released by Nightboat in February 22, The Cheerful Scapegoat, Figure It Out, Camp Marmalade, My 1980s and Other Essays, The Anatomy of Harpo Marx, Humiliation, Hotel Theory, Circus, Andy Warhol, Jackie Under My Skin, and The Queen's Throat, which was nominated for a National Books Critics Circle Award. His first feature-length film, The Collective, premiered at UnionDocs in New York in 2021. He received an American Academy of Arts and Letters Award in Literature in 2020. And Yale's Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library acquired his literary archive in 2019. He is a distinguished professor of English, French, and comparative literature here at the CUNY Graduate Center. So maybe this goes without saying, but for those who have had the opportunity to take one of Wayne's seminars or to eavesdrop on his conversations, would agree that there are few minds as curious, dexterous, spellbinding, eloquent, and generous as his. what's so captivating, at least for me, is seeing his mind at work and his thoughts brimming with his enthusiasm and our surprise, always landing as a leaf that rests from the thrill of pursuit. Trance and Notebook, too, are invitations to the mind at work, a permissible passivity and space to gaze at and wander through, the ways in which Wayne sets and breaks the improvised rules to his own Le Grand Jeu of make-believe and hide and seek, of hopscotch and telephone, with innocent wonder at how, but never why, we delight in his, quote, sick ache, neuralgia, sensualgia, sick of the sensual father, may our fourth finger linger, may we be caught dead lingering, may we recapture Mars and Hartley. And oh my goodness, it is so difficult to refrain oneself from picking just a few lines to love from the plethora of exuberantly excessive stanzas, because we want to play the game of guessing from which museum does the smell of meat come. While often delivered for us, that triumphant stroke is always within grasp. Is the, quote, sensual father a reference to, quote, Siggy Freud? Is the gown that drags, whose absence is in question, an indirect reference to Ponge's Snell, whose mucus always leaves behind traces of itself? If not, we have at least the permission to pretend we've made the winning move. So without further ado, Wayne Koestenbaum.
Thank you. And Gabriel, thank you for your entrancing reading. It's no secret to my students here at CUNY who've seen poems of yours in my classes that you're one of my favorite, new poets in the United States that I've been reading. And it's been such a joy to discover your work and to sing its praises everywhere I can. So am I spotlit here, Jared? Because I still somehow, I am seeing your lovely face and the face that gave that amazing introduction large on my screen. So I would be directing this to, now here I am, my unlovely face, but still at least I know who's reading. Okay, Jared, thank you for that introduction and thanks for being the reincarnation of Ponge, which I think you are. So I'm going to read two sections from Ultramarine. The first is notebook number 6, called Art's Marsupial Pouch. Grandfather-loving passé British writers, Macefield. Beard, when, smoke, funk, nap in t-shirt, bow ties I borrow, Traviata Toscanini album in shame breakfront, with Jan Pierce Passover LP. Tattooed guy ordered $3 prosciutto chunk like a steak slab with pickles. Plinth beneath Assyrian statue Isis smashed. Anger of he who smashes antiquity. Leonard Nimoy died. Harriet the Spy taking notes on cruel neighbor girl in Hallmark store near Westgate Mall, greeting cards, sandpiper epochal. Bradley Cooper's uterine incapacity. Bradley reads this notebook and laughs, alive in a world not belonging to me. Sober orange trousers, mom wardrobe, sugar overdosing, dizzy nest of whens to signify fatal talismanic admiration of hirsute oratory. Excretory demandingness is anal rage or art's marsupial pouch. My aunt loving Papageno's crummy amok majority. Lobster roll in a paper bag, clove-scented Reuben. pregnant blister on thumb fringe from badly handled suitcase. Invites me to aleatory apartment, shower together on 100th anniversary of Schwarzkopf's birth. Eat Hamantaschen without knowing their function or meaning. Hey, Melisande, where are you going? I miss you, mystic Melisande. Why do I hug my smallness? Rebellion against poet who used word salad as slur. Music unfolds upon sloping Mephistopheles. Original sin, I said, was in my DNA. Applauded her keen phrase, lesbian judgment. Ange pur, ange radieux, Faust concavity I occupy when I explain the spanked boy. Insist again on speaking French to him as patchouli seance. Ange pur, the E not quite sustained, but ange radieux, ange radieux. The ES extended becomes a home for your punished wandering impulses. Grandfather gave me a blank bound leather book I began to use as scrapbook, unfinished. Used his maudlin watery oeuvre as phantom inverted cock receptacle, like converting a foreskin into shot glass chalice. Laud becomes an object to hold, like a gold Oscar lingam, Streisand's Forever. On a clear day, you can see Walter Benjamin taking a bath. Okay, and now I am going to read from much later in the book, section 32. I think of each of these sections as notebooks. I think there's 48 in the book altogether. They're about 8 pages each. So this one, number 32, is called May We Uncorpse the Bubble. Dreamt someone criticized my posture, said I craned my head forward unattractively. Hat of the murdered man, hat of the stymied, swastika in a Brooklyn park, statues laying claim to nothingness. Made lines with 2 green markers. One marker was defunct. I don't adequately separate depleted and functional markers. The recalled cedar lipstick she wore, Giacometti in sheer high chair nighties. Parisian debt cakes. Is Origen the famous castrated guy? Eruption, belated as frizz wall against languid paste Roman nookie cherub skeleton, out nostos, out nostalgia, sensualgia, sick of the sensual father. May our 4th finger linger, may we be caught dead lingering, may we recapture Marsden Hartley. May we uncorpse the bubble, may we uncorpse the bubble. Being inwardly sodomized by go-getters with one rouge blind eye. Slowed large mom, Judan courageous as at a processed slant. Rejected cheese is a sedative. Red macaw egg pancake debt, a Hume debt, his head injured. She sees I'm staring at her boyfriend's arms. We partner with a pig farm. Think of pressing the fawn darkly from behind. Marlowe or Marlin, we are beholden to the backward pressing. He chooses to wear a t-shirt in 28-degree weather to show off muscular arms, not just to his girlfriend, but to us, pestilences. Tonight, I will be the vulgate rememberer. Encourage bubble mentality. Using mutter wrongly in a throttled story and showing the story to someone whose own relation to power was throttled. Bragging about Beowulf in 1980, bragging about Plutarch in 2016, never wanting to sit near me because I'll be gay flag unwriting his authority. Start reciting the Iliad at the top of my lungs. They walk around apartment wearing kimonos and cock rings and nothing else. Bear culture. Glenn Gould said Streisand italicized. Your Baltimore beard in diner contrite booth. Again, my mother's red Parker ballpoint pen by the downstairs wall phone. Son is a goldfish with a veil tail boyfriend. Tetrachromatic suckers. White address book featuring Aunt Pearlie, not partial to my mother. Not the redemptive fairy I'd anticipated. In public library, I asked, where are books about doctors? Embarrassed to say I sought Dr. Zhivago. Librarian exiled me from adult card catalog and deported me to kid books about doctors. In my drawer, Elmer's glue, index cards, hole puncher, rubber cement, coin collection in a blue cardboard folder, squeeze pennies into blue holes. He chose the object because it was nearby. I chose the object because its carapace and Newman reminded me of an earlier possession I was attached to. If the gown drags, how can it be absent? If it is absent, how can it be shining? And does its dragging diminish or exacerbate the heart's irresoluteness? Gloss on a stanza by Benjamin Fondane, Fondane. My body courted a siege of Debbie Reynolds dolls after her death by stroke or broken heart one day after her daughter Carrie Fisher died. My body locked its emergency exits. My body is a multi-volumed Maigret escapade by Edith Wharton, or a wedding cookie sick of being a wedding cookie. A bathhouse lice carrier photographed. My body is a schwa trying to achieve simultaneity with Eddie Fisher through whatever surgery is available. May ink's secret source escape blame. Listened to last movement of Liszt Faust Symphony, 1960, Leonard Bernstein, tenor soloist Charles Bressler. Liner notes translate Hutzpahdik Goethe's ewig weibliche as woman in all of us. Contrite about the 1,000 thresholds each day I traipse over without acknowledging their momentousness. Walter Benjamin refers to colporteurs in his 1930 radio broadcast aimed at Berlin children. I like Benjamin best when he is speaking to children about colporteurs and puppet shows. He mentions Unter den Linden. To that spot of time, I may return, seeking vainly to translate the Linden's askew testimony. But don't scorn me if sloth, fear, or faithlessness prevent my return. And that's it for me. And now the fun part, the conversation. Well, the fun part was also hearing Gabriel, and it was fun to read to all of you too, I'll admit it. Marianne Cause, I'm so happy you're here. I see you, you're right there, at the top of the queue.
Hi, Marianne. Thank you so much, Wayne. You happen to read a lot of my favorite sections from your new book, so thank you so much. And thanks also to Gabriel, both of you, for such capsizing readings. I'm going to spotlight Gabriel, and I guess maybe I'll do that to myself. And we will begin our conversation. So I thought maybe we could begin by my asking the two of you what your relationship is to the lyric as an adjective, a noun, a once bygone or taboo tradition, as well as a genre. Because it seems to me like both of you are concerned with, in a sense, rupture and expanding hermeneutic horizons. So I wonder, given that the lyric really sort of comes to prominence in the 19th century, with the initial glimpse of modernity, the subsequent influx of the visual and hyperproduction of objects, in what ways does your work tempt lyricality? And would either of you consider any aspect of romanticism as part of your repertoire, whether it be in the sense of poetry, narrative, a combination of the two, or even essay/criticism? And I will apologize. I know that the term has fallen out of vogue and we're not supposed to use it anymore, but I'm interested in what you think about the romantic tradition and how the two of you might launch different or similar investigations into that tradition.
Okay, I might start if that's okay with Wayne. I have an answer to this, though I don't see myself particularly interested in the romantic tradition. However, I think I have a lot of thoughts on the lyric. I kind of hate it and I depend on it, and I kind of hate that I depend on it, but I like to think that in that semi-bitter relation, there's a lot to do and a lot to get out of it. So I've kind of like, one of the ways that I've described my work for a long time is through simulation as like as a term for me. Like I am very kind of against a theory of poetry that thinks of it as expressing or putting forward some kind of essential truth about X, Y, or Z, though it certainly has cathartic elements. It's not my thing. I like kind of thinking like, what if I simulate the experience of moving something, or what if I simulate the experience of confessing, or what if I set myself at this certain distance? And I think this is a book very much about mental health. It's a book very much about my experience of obsessive compulsive disorder. And one of the things I wanted to do was, I didn't really want to write a book about obsessive compulsive disorder in the way we might think of that phrase. I wanted to kind of, I wanted to think, what would it be like to set myself at some amount of distance from that and then make the book obsessive in some way. And one of the ways that I did that was I really started with those love poems, of which I only really read one, but it's kind of all over the book. I started there, and the gesture was, okay, what would it be like to write a poem about a person who says, I love you and I need you and I depend on you so much to feel attached to the world. Okay, like what if it's not me saying that, but I'm thinking about the person who would feel that that was a gesture that was required of them. And that was a way, I think, of coping with my own like detachment to the lyric, which I just feel, it makes me feel icky, but I can't get out of it. I'm not particularly good at getting out of it. How about you, Wayne?
I love that answer. I really, really love that answer. I guess I'd write lyrics if I could. I mean, I think I've never really been a lyric poet. I'm too talky for that. And I think I was originally in my early life as a writer when I wrote fiction, and I was never really encouraged to write poetry. Not that one needs to be encouraged, but I'm kind of have a little logorrhea or whatever. I'm wordy. I like move, I'm discursive. I'm something. I'm chatty, vernacular. I don't also throw my voice up to on a plinth, one of my favorite words, plinth. I don't put my voice on a plinth. And sometimes I fall into lyric moments, and I always feel blessed by those. And in Ultramarine, I tended to put the lyric moments, or the moments that seem to be behaving in a lyric way, at the end of each notebook. As as a kind of acknowledgement that for me still closure in a book this talky and seemingly random to a casual reader of it, it seemed that I needed the closure offered by the faux height of a lyric voice, even if it was a lyric voice saying he is not going to return to that spot of time to sound the depths of Unter den Linden. Will definitely not return to that. We'll return to the bathtub where Walter Benjamin is taking a bath, or other sensual fathers, but will not sound the lyric depths, except for, I guess, my bid for lyric intensity in Ultramarine was the word ultramarine. Where I think whenever the word ultramarine and the notion of some kind of chromatic foundation for the inscriptions we make on surfaces, ultramarine is the layer below my designs. And when I try to look into ultramarine, which is also the sky, and that's very romantic to confuse the lake and the sky. And I think when I look into ultramarine and acknowledge that it's both the sublimity of the up there and the murky marsupial pouch foundation of that, that's when I'm getting most lyric. The last thing I'll say though, I was aware that Faust, one of the reasons I really wanted to read the sections I read was because they had Faust in it. And I'm a little obsessed, this is a little OCD of me, I'm a little obsessed with describing to the world why it matters to me that Ange and Ange, why there's that in the sung in the great last moment in Faust, and not Liszt's Faust Symphony, but Gounod's Faust. And I guess I really love Gounod's Faust, and I often say it's my favorite opera, though I know it's not. That opera hasn't been in fashion in 100 years. So my romanticism involves a deliberately passé and really irrelevant relation to a desire to really explain bits of Faust. That's not romanticism, it's just pedantry.
I love that. But Wayne, I just want to say, like, going into this lyric question, I feel like a way that both of us approach maybe the thing that the lyric wants to approach is by the unit of the day. And like, I didn't read from it, but my book also has a kind of journal section that is all about kind of saying, okay, today I did this, today I did that, today I did this. So they were always in the same moment, and we know we're progressing in some way in time. And like, this is something I want to ask you about, which is like, what's going on in the day in your book? Because it has this gesture that's like, oh, these are journals, these are entries I put in a given day or something. But sometimes these entries really bleed into each other. Sometimes they feel so isolated as to be like, oh, that can't be an account of a day. The account of the day is a strange commentary on a syllable in an opera or something, like there's this way of like, if I took this as, I really wanted to learn about the events of Wayne Koestenbaum's day, I would be a very confused reader. So I'm trying to think about that organizing principle in our books.
I want to say something about the day in my work, and then I want to kind of pivot, if I can remember the pivot when I finish saying my first part. I want to pivot to something that I thought of in your work having to do with the day. But I will say, I literally wrote Ultramarine in notebooks over 4 years, so that they were literally the thought transcripts of my days. But just like my diary never says very many concrete things, nor did the trance notebook say very many concrete things, except when people die, like Leonard Nimoy dies. He died the day that the New York Times had his obituary was the day I wrote in a notebook, today Leonard Nimoy died. And I tended in my revision of Ultramarine to always keep in those death markers as Googleable bits to mark that honestly, juridically, indexically, this was the day. The same thing happens with like the smashing of the statue, Trump elected, appears, Carrie Fisher died. I think that those are not faked, and those betray the secret dayness. But I was thinking in your work, and this connects to Schuyler, whom you acknowledge in your afterward or your forward or one of these paratextual spaces, you acknowledge as somebody that you were thinking about. I think you have in common with Schuyler what I feel like you've picked up from him or that you already had, and it got affirmed by Schuyler, a way of talking about the day by being in the poem and kind of signaling the poem from within the poem and being not too specific about the day, but holding up present time and poem time as this kind of set of like mirrors facing each other, something. I guess said more simply that I feel that you embody a lyric, somewhat lyric presentness in your work by, like Schuyler, showing the hand composing the poem to make the day, to get through the day, but without chronicling the day. It's a trick. I don't know if that's ringing a bell with you.
It does. It does. And I mean, there's a kind of thematic reason for it in this book. So first, I just want to say something that was almost the epigraph to this book. I really like the epigraphs that ended up here, but this is one of the rejected epigraphs, of which there's like 3, was the last 4 lines of Schuyler's February, which I'll just quickly read. February is he's basically looking out a window and he's thinking about the day, and he sees a woman and her baby in a frame of her window, and he says, like, is it the baby that makes the frame? Is it the frame that makes the baby? Whatever. Anyways, it ends with, it's the yellow dust inside the tulips. It's the shape of a tulip. It's the water in the drinking glass the tulips are in. It's a day like any other. And I really liked and stole much of the usage of that in the poem that I read today, which has a sort of, it's a drip of oil. It's what I already know, something like that. But the thematic sense is like Luis Montes Torres so he's a Cuban exile. He's quite mentally ill, finds a significant amount of difficulty attaching to the world that he's in. And for me, the kind of narrative of mental illness in that book is inseparable from the political crises of his moment, of sort of imagined future moments. And Luis Montes Torres for me is somebody who's like, he can't quite attach to something. He can't quite feel like he knows what he wants from something, feels like he belongs in it. That's never going to really quite work for him. And the day became almost like Luis's relationship to the day became almost like a metonym for that situation, where it's kind of like he kind of has this incredible ability to account for the very minor distinctions between one day and another. He really likes that days pass. Something about his relationship makes him also feel like, you know, he really describes his relationship in terms of like, we make days pass by existing near each other. And that's something he really depends on. But those distinctions between days, the slight variations, are also a kind of undercurrent of horror in the book. And that's, the journal section is really trying to do that in its insistence on being like, today I felt depressed. Today was better. Today was worse. You know, like that kind of, just like, we're just always in this sort of like in and out. And so that's why I think there is that kind of, the poem sort of seems to do this kind of reflecting work, because I think for somebody like Luis, which is to say somebody like for me, the poem, though we're trying to kind of separate ourselves from the world or saying our experience or whatever, is always like trying to gesture at like, can I anchor myself in any way, shape, or form by doing something on this page? Usually the answer is like, no, or not in the way you hoped it would happen, but maybe. That's kind of what I think is going on there.
Jared, I'm looking meaningfully at you to ask us the next question.
Thank you.
This one was so good.
No, I mean, it's really interesting, and we don't have to harp on this, the accumulation of days, but, you know, Wayne, I know you're familiar, of course, with Michel Herry and his notebooks, Nights as Days, Days as Night. And Gabriel mentioned something about the withdrawal of existence, which I think is an invitation to the unfolding of writing. of the poem. But as you mentioned, can I anchor myself, right? And not in the way one hopes. And I think the accumulation of days in the journal and the diary become a sort of shapeless, I don't know if either of you would agree, but in a way, like a shapeless mass of lived experience, right? So how does one distinguish the events or the prolongation of the poetic event, right? Which is, I guess, also a part of the lyric tradition. So I don't know. I also maybe thought I would ask about something that I think the two of you also share in common is the profusion of different, or the coexistence of different speech types, right? Bakhtin's heteroglossia. And for Gabriel, I see both in the idea of the meta book, right? The book, which is aware of itself as a book, as well as the sort of prosy metrum sequence, the engagement and disengagement, the sort of litany between the prosaic interventions, the editorial interventions, followed always by the sequence of verse. And for Wayne, I think the notebook, right, and I believe you've mentioned this several times, the notebook is an invitation, is a very generous space for different forms to come together and coexist. So I'm wondering if either of the two of you could elaborate on the role that formal constraints or formal breaks play in the composition or revision of your work. And maybe also as an addendum, how have poetic books that have announced themselves as notebooks, diaries, journals, memoirs, biography, autobiography, etc., you know, like Larry, like Max Jacob, Lynn Haginian, writers like this, who are writing, I think, poetry, but not calling it poetry. So I don't know if that makes sense to either.
Yeah, no, it does, though there's many things that I want to say, to the point that I might say a thing, make Wayne say a thing, and then maybe I'll say another thing. But so let me start actually by taking up the issue of voice. I really wanted this to feel kind of multi-textured, and I, like Wayne, am very interested in sort of singing and kind of vocal registers, and I'm not like trained in any way, but I try to think about, in reading, kind of what I want to do pitch-wise, volume-wise, thinking like just really about the kind of formal presentation. And so I talk like this is how I talk. But for me, Luis always had to be here. Luis had to be at a kind of lower, slower, more stable. The pitch doesn't vary as much. This is kind of where I imagine Luis to be, which is why I read those poems like this, even though that's not really how I talk. And for the editors, I wanted something that could feel both cold and kind of campy, because I wanted them to tell the jokes, because Luis is not going to tell any jokes. He's a kind of very sad person. So I like having jokes in the book, and if there was going to be any, it was going to come from these editors. But they also had to feel like editors who, there are many, a warm, interesting, poetic editor. I didn't want to write those. I wanted to write the cold, interested editors who would be like, this much of the edition, this date, this happened. Okay. So then I try to read them kind of more up and kind of, you know, Luis did this, Luis did that, Luis, and it would just kind of have this annoying, kind of cloying thing where they'll end up saying something like, you know, in 2035, everything burned down, you know, like that kind of thing. And 2 weeks ago, we did a Nightboat reading, Wayne, I, and 3 others, C and Juliet Lee, whose new book is so good, Angel Dominguez, whose new book is also so good, and Cody Rose Clevedence, whose book is also so good. 5's kind of recent Nightboat people. And I read a section from this book called Dictation, where Luis or I or whatever try to be as multi-textured as possible for the first time in his career, where Luis usually kind of likes a really stable, hold, kind of patient, meditative thing. Really tried to just be kind of frantic. And that recording's on YouTube, and I enjoyed what we ended up doing. I felt like that was a lot of kind of invested energy from me and just kind of getting a particular vocal performance. And I'm going to stop myself now, and maybe I'll come back.
I'm just thinking about form, and this book, Ultramarine, doesn't really have a form, but here are ways that it does have form. It was when it was originally written in handwritten in notebooks. I write, my handwriting is sort of big and loopy, and there would be the edge of the page. The notebooks were narrow, and there would be, even though it was prose, there would be a line break. And so when I transcribed the raw material of the trance notebooks, I kept it exactly like that. But I turned them into I made them poetic lines by treating the arbitrary line breaks as real line breaks. Because actually, when I write in my notebooks, my arbitrary prose line breaks are often line breaks, particularly when I'm hyphenating. I love hyphenating. And so, because it's fun to split up a word, that's the fissure game, I think. So one kind of formal constraint the book lives with is an indebtedness or residual sentimental loyalty to the original faux line breaks of the form. Another kind of formal constraint is something like 3 beats per line, 2, 4, rarely 5. I mean, they're not beats like I-ams, but it's, stranger's car door, opening in folklore. That's a rhyme, actually. I'm reading Reader's Digest warnings about porn rings. I have a notion there have to be at least 2 stresses to make a line. So I have a notion of that. And then I'm reasonably fussy about line breaks. And I also, punctuation, there was going to be no periods. There was going to be ample uses of em dashes and commas, but no semicolons and no colons, with maybe 1 or 2 exceptions. And something I very much admire in your work, Gabriel, is is the absence of punctuation. And it's something I've often not been able to do until the trance notebooks, a way of keeping syntax floating. And so that's a kind of formal thing I'm working with here, is not having punctuation, so that the different stanzas can sometimes syntactically seem to be part of each other, but not necessarily. And I guess the final formal constraint goes back to, I think, when I was an undergraduate and read Wordsworth's Prelude, which really, in a kind of corny way, influenced me. A very 1977 thing to say, but I really was very moved by it, and still, with my spots of time, kind of thought, wow, yeah, you can do that thing, and you can also write prosaically and be a poet. It just, you have to have the undercurrent of something. But I loved it when he'd be saying something, and then it would stop, and then there would be the line would drop, and then it would begin in the middle. And so I thought there's a lot of indentation in a kind of look at, I'm opening the book and it says there's indentation, changing your mind about Wordsworth's change of mind. So the indentation there is, it's not like a reference to Wordsworth, that would be sort of stupid, but it's a reference to the kind of long poem in blank verse that has those little indentations that give you a feeling that you're in this unified chronicle.
I have to say, it is marvelously funny to me to hear you say that it is very 1977 to say that Wordsworth's Prelude influenced you. That is a hysterical thought. I also, just speaking about our sort of arbitrary formal beliefs, I do have this kind of belief in some sense that unless we have some other reason for doing so, if a line has ended and moved to the next one, you don't need a punctuation at the end of that line, because the line break is doing that for you in some way. So I have my own, I only put commas if they're internal in the line, and I avoid doing so at end lines. Makes me feel too romantic. But I actually just, Wayne, I just have like a very minor, maybe too specific question about, coming from your reading, and I'm like in section 32, which you read from, there's like what I would think of as a very like exemplary phrase that reminds me of a kind of like phrasal gesture that this book does a lot, which is almost like these phrases that have so many adjectival words that it seems to just not end. Like you keep thinking this must be the last kind of modifier on this phrase, but it keeps going. So like I'm thinking on 295, so the section begins, eruption belated as Friswall against, and then we have languid paste, Roman, nookie cherub, skeleton, out nostos, out nostalgia. And that sort of like, I don't know, something like skeleton seems to sort of hang off. It's like, oh, I thought we were at cherub. Wait, no, we're at skeleton, like, and I'm just sort of interested in what feels like a kind of accumulation of detail that this book is really into, a kind of like stacking of clauses and phrases, and it gets, it's really like nice architecturally, I think.
Thank you. No, that does push it. So in terms of the stacking of languid paste Roman against eruption, I guess that the I don't know what to say to that, except that I'm aware of, in the revision of Ultramarine, I was very aware of trying to be sensitive to my own inner metronome of verb expectation.
Yeah.
To not totally ignore the kind of suspense factor that syntax gives you, where you're expecting the arrival of the noun if you're within adjectives, or you're expecting something syntactically to happen. And I try to play with that and not just totally leave the reader or myself in a weird limbo, because most of the earlier drafts of this book did leave a reader in a kind of limbo, and it was very hard for me to read even. And so I guess the revision was always trying to befriend syntax again, but with a very kind of tough love relationship.
I like that.
Because I love syntax. I do love syntax, and I also love adjectives, and I love hyphenation, but I also love Germanic compounding. Something that in a new manuscript of mine, I'm going really asocially haywire on. I think at one moment when I refer to a mom as Juden courageous. So Juden italicized, Juden -courageous is the kind of thing I'm doing all over the place now.
I love that.
And it's also great that you, to be able to turn words into adjectives, joining adjectives and nouns with the hyphen or the dash, right? Which is a simple mark.
Like doyening, I think I use, in the new manuscript, I use doyening as a verb. But that's easy, that's fun. That's where we write poetry. Doyening.
So I have, of course, so many questions, but maybe should we open the floor?
Yeah, absolutely, because some people are saying goodbye, which means that we're maybe saying goodbye very soon. So yeah, question time.
Yeah, so you blurt it out if you'd like, or type it in the chat, whatever you'd like.
I thought it was just great. And let me just say, I really love borrowing the loneliness that Gabriel said. I borrow your loneliness. Good Lord, how beautiful. And of course, Wayne, everything. I think all those personages, all those people who come in this great performance, Mélisande and Marsden Hartley, my very favorite. Anyway, I just wanted to say I loved every moment.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you so much. I have the same sense of Wayne's book. There is an incredible cast of characters, of artists.
Thank you.
Same for you, Gabrielle.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, there are, both real and imagined personas or personages who appear in your book.
This is true. The strange foursome that puts out books in Philly, which honestly could be very real.
We have not said the word Pessoa, which is kind of like the word that's banned from this conversation, but in a weird way, the Pessoan echo chamber of those who have staged melancholy through personae and heteronyms or whatever you call it, is a kind of personage population in your book. The not naming Pessoa allows the whole history of pre-Pessoa and post-Pessoan heteronymity to seem to be like a kind of chorus, I think, in your book.
And he was here earlier. My friend, who is I think he dropped out. Sebastian Castillo, who's a young poet and fiction writer, who I just think is really brilliant. Like his work is also very Pessoan and very. He's a little bit more into Bologna, I think, but his work has been really influential for me, and he's just somebody that I think with a lot. So I just wanted to sort of name him.
Oh, I'm really into him. Doesn't he have a book called like 32 Venezuelan somethings?
It's 47 Venezuelan novels. I always get the number wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's 47 Venezuelan novels. And they're all like short prose poems that are pretending to be like entire novels. It's brilliant. He's really
brilliant. He's the most brilliant concept.
There is a sort of pseudo question in the chat. This was maybe asked a little while ago, but by Billy Chernikoff, who was also a fantastic poet. Her question: why does the lyric make you feel icky? And I think this is in response to Gabriel.
Yeah, this was a bit earlier. I'll give a short answer because I think that I could go on for a long time, but perhaps there's something about my upbringing. But the idea of saying, I feel X, I am somewhat allergic to in the written word. I do this kind of terrible thing that either people are really into or people are really not into, which is that I work my way around the thing. But a thing that I like to do is I say, the lyric makes me feel icky, or sort of the kind of gesture of straightforwardness makes me feel icky. But what I actually do is I just really dress it up in stuff. And so like Hold Me to It, which I read today, does a thing where it's like, it's kind of really trying to think a little analytically about global warming, our relationship to infrastructure, and the kind of promises infrastructure has made to us. And then it's like, I have very little hopes for everything, and blah, 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 blah. And then it's like, except in loving you, which is maybe stupid. And then it kind of goes back into its thing, and it ends with this kind of two-sided line, which is like, when the stove is lit, division, when I promise you anything, both of them connected by hold me to it. So we have, when I promise you anything, hold me to it. Like, let me do something for you. And when the stove is lit, hold me to it, as in burrow my face in a burning electronic. And so I wanted to sort of end with that two-sided statement as a way of kind of gesturing towards what I think the book's general gesture is, which is, for every time it says something that sounds more honest, it's going to say a lot of things around it that sound less honest. And hopefully one feels that the things that sound less honest are actually the honest ones, and that we have some reversals. That's the hope.
I would also, my kind of answer to that, the lyric doesn't make me feel icky because I don't really do lyric, but I can do confession and I can do autobiography, and that I find icky, which is why I've never written a memoir. I cannot bear, I mean, I love it in other people, so I can't say I like to read it when it's good in other people, but I don't like the notion of telling something about what happened to me chronologically, or to go about it in any way but thematically or linguistically. And that's my Michel Léris or Michel Léris debt, big time. And that's very 1982 of me, when I first read Richard Howard's translation of Manhood. And I thought, that's the way you do autobiography. Pieces and linguistically and by themes. And so for my way of being an autobiographical writer and not doing it is trying to efface the first person as much as possible, and to throw it on, just like mess up the sequence, make it weird, like talk about the sensual father, like my father, though I've often said my father, that I find icky to say my. I find my a really icky word.
You know, it's funny. I just want I want to say one last thing, and then we should probably end. But it's funny, in both of our books, the way that we end up saying a thing about ourselves is by making reference to somebody else, a name, a figure, a star. And I had this moment when you said, "I've never written a memoir." I was like, isn't my 1980s kind of that? And then I was like, well, no, because you're always getting the star figure instead, or you're getting the sort of cultural critique instead. And I feel like Ultramarine is a book, and really the trance journals in general are books where every time you think you might be close to, let's say, Wayne Koestenbaum, you're going to get, let's say, leashed. And the key is that's Wayne Koestenbaum. But yeah, I think there's like a bibliophile's impulse to say, no, like it's here or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's the thrill of discovery too, when you can sort of put all the pieces together and like, I don't know, I think I said this earlier, we may be incorrect and we may be projecting, but there's a sort of, I don't know, there's a flint moment, a spark, and that's really what matters, right? In I don't know, thought, poetry, or whatever, at least to me. So unless there are any other questions, maybe we'll conclude. Let me just say thank you again to Wayne and Gabriel for giving us or lending us their time this evening. I also want to thank, while they're still here, Giancarlo, Bettina, if she's here, and Carol for their support and sponsorship of Reverie. Also to this semester's cohort, Rev cohort, Coco, Fred, Alex, and Monica, if you're here. And of course, absolutely everybody for attending. For those who are interested, Reverie number 4, our translation events, will be held in person at Hunter College and will feature Matvey Yankovic, Eugene Ostevsky, and Maria Stepanova. This is Thursday, April 28th at 7 p.m., hosted by Alex. We also have planned a Zoom event on Thursday, May 5th at 6 p.m., Queer Joy and Resistance, Zine Culture and Politics in Poland, with Alexandra Kaminska, moderated by Monica Zaleska. If you want to learn more about our upcoming events or register for upcoming events, you can visit us at reveriepoesis at eventbrite.com or follow us at reveriepoesis on Twitter and Instagram. And if you miss an event or are not able to attend an event, you can subscribe to our digital archive of Rev events on YouTube. I think we're all putting this in the chat. Or maybe not, but it's all out. You're all very savvy, I'm sure, and can find it. If you don't have anywhere to go, you can. I can keep the Zoom open and you can socialize. But if not, thank you again. Have a wonderful rest of your evening and enjoy the much needed spring recess.
Thank you, Jared, and thank you, Coco and CUNY and all that. It was lovely to be here.
Real
Thank you.
with you. Talk to you. Bye.
Everyone.
Bye all.